The air in my home office is still and silent, the kind of quiet that usually feels peaceful. But right now, it feels like the air before a lightning strike. I'm standing here, frozen, one hand still resting on the mouse, the other gripping the edge of my desk. My knuckles are white. On the monitor in front of me, a live video feed plays out in perfect high-definition clarity. It's the camera I had installed in the living room after the break-in 2 years ago, the one hidden inside the smoke detector. I told Mark it was broken, that the repair guy said it was a lost cause. I'd said it was a shame, a waste of money. He'd just shrugged and said, "Don't worry about it, Dad." He's in the living room now. My son, Mark. He's not alone. Sarah, his fiancée, is with him. They're not on the couch. He's on his knees on the rug, his back to the camera, fiddling with something near the floorboard vent. I'd been working, paying bills online when the motion alert popped up in the corner of my screen. A little notification I usually ignore, but something made me click it. Maybe it was the way he'd been so insistent on coming over today, saying he wanted to check on me. Maybe it was a father's intuition, a tiny cold finger of dread tapping on the back of my neck. His voice comes through the speakers, crisp and clear. There's no mistaking it. "He'll never know," Mark says. The words hang in the quiet of my office. They're so casual, so assured. There's a tone in his voice I've never heard directed at me before. It's a mix of condescension and a kind of giddy, secretive glee. It's the voice of someone who believes they've already won. Sarah is just out of frame, but I can hear her soft footsteps on the hardwood floor. "You're sure?" she asks, her voice a whispery echo of his confidence. "Positive." He lets out a short, sharp laugh. It's a cruel, ugly sound that doesn't belong in my living room, doesn't belong coming from my son. The old man is clueless. Completely. He thinks I'm here to help him with his finances, to protect him in his old age. He says the word protect with a mocking sing-song lilt, as if the very idea is a hilarious joke. I can feel my heart beating, a slow, heavy thud in my chest. It feels like it's pumping something thicker than blood. Ice water, maybe. He shifts on his knees, and I see him slide a small, flat device back into the vent. A keylogger. It has to be, to capture my passwords. My breath catches in my throat. This isn't a random thought, a paranoid fantasy. This is a planned, deliberate action. By the time he realizes half his retirement fund is gone and rerouted to our offshore account, Mark continues, his voice dripping with a smug satisfaction. "We'll be in Bali, lying on a beach, drinking something with a little umbrella in it. He'll be sitting here, confused, wondering where it all went wrong." Sarah giggles. It's a light, airy sound that curdles in my ears. "He'll probably just think he forgot where he put it," she says, and her giggle turns into a full laugh. They both laugh. In my house, while they plot to rob me blind. The theft, the sheer act of it. That's a blow. It's a violation. It's a knife in the back. But this is the twist. This is the part that steals the air from my lungs and leaves me hollow. It's the utter contempt. The way he says, "the old man," the way he reduces my life's work, my security, my peace to nothing more than a stepping stone for his vacation. The way he so easily dismisses me as clueless. He doesn't see a father. He sees a mark, an easy target, a senile old fool who can't see what's happening right in front of his face. I stare at the screen, at the back of my son's head, the little boy I taught to ride a bike, the young man I helped move into his first apartment, the man I was so proud of. I see a stranger, and in that moment, standing frozen in the quiet of my office, I feel the foundations of my world, the very story of my life, crack and begin to crumble into dust. The insult isn't the money, the insult is the laughter. The world knows me as Arthur Vance, a 68-year-old man who putters in his garden, who tells long, meandering stories about the good old days to anyone polite enough to listen. To my son Mark and the rest of my family, I am a kindly, slightly forgetful grandfather. A man whose greatest daily challenge is deciding between pruning the roses or deadheading the hydrangeas. They see the slow, deliberate movements, the way I sometimes pause mid-sentence as if searching for a lost word, and they mistake it for a mind winding down. They see peace and assume its emptiness. They have no idea who I used to be. For 35 years, I wasn't Arthur, the grandfather. I was the Bloodhound. It wasn't a title I gave myself. It was one whispered in boardrooms from Zurich to Singapore, spoken with a mixture of respect and fear. When a billion-dollar company discovered a leak, a ghost in the machine siphoning off funds through a labyrinth of false invoices and phantom vendors, they didn't call the police first. They called me. My specialty wasn't in brute force auditing, in simply adding up the columns. My gift, my curse, was an almost preternatural sense for patterns. I could look at a ledger spanning 10,000 pages and feel the single anomalous entry. It would call to me like a wrong note in a silent room. I could trace a single dollar as it slipped from a corporate account, slithered through a series of shell companies with names like Horizon Holdings and Apex Ventures, danced across 3 different continents, and finally came to rest in a private account in the Caymans, all before most people had finished their morning coffee. It was a form of artistry. I didn't just see numbers. I saw the story they told. I saw the fingerprints of human weakness left on the digital ledger. The greed, the desperation, the sheer, stupid arrogance. I understood the psychology of the thief better than they understood themselves. They thought they were clever, hiding their tracks in complexity. But to me, complexity was just a map. Their greed was the compass that always pointed true north. I retired not because I lost my edge, but because I was tired of the map. I was tired of living in a world painted in shades of deceit. I wanted the simple, honest truth of a seed becoming a flower. I wanted to build a legacy of family, not a reputation for catching crooks. I hung up my metaphorical leash, buried the Bloodhound in the back garden next to the compost heap, and devoted myself to being just Arthur. I leaned into their perception of me. I'd tell the same story twice, forgetting I'd already told it. I'd ask for help with my new smartphone, feigning confusion. I cultivated the persona of the gentle, fading old man with deliberate care. It was a role I enjoyed playing because it meant I was home. It meant I was safe. But you don't spend a lifetime honing an instinct and just turn it off. It sleeps, but it never truly dies. It's in the way I still notice the micro-expressions on my son's face when he talks about his new business venture. It's in the way I unconsciously track the subtle shifts in his and Sarah's body language when they think I'm not looking. It's a low hum in the back of my mind, a vibration so faint I've learned to ignore it. I tell myself it's just a father's worry. I tell myself I'm being paranoid, that the man I was is gone, and the man I am now only needs to worry about aphids on his rose bushes. I tend to my garden, I talk about the past, and I smile my gentle, grandfatherly smile. And all the while, in the quiet, dark soil of my mind, something is beginning to stir. A scent is on the air, a trail is being laid, and I was so wrong to think that life was behind me. The Bloodhound was never buried. He was only sleeping. It started with a whisper, not a shout, a single errand line item on a bank statement I'd printed out, more out of lifelong habit than any real suspicion. My eyes, trained for decades to spot the one leaf that didn't match the forest, caught it immediately. A payment to Metro West Utilities for $247.53. I pay my utilities to City Power and Light. I always have. I sat at my old oak desk, the paper crisp under my fingers, and I felt the first faint tremor in the foundation of my world. It wasn't the amount, it was the pattern. A fraudulent charge doesn't invent a plausible-sounding company name. A thief looking for a quick, untraceable hit uses a generic digital service name. This was different. This was someone building a facade. I let it go. I noted it, filed the statement away in the review folder in my mind, and I waited. A part of me, the father, was already pleading, concocting excuses, a simple error at the bank, a miskeyed account number, a new legitimate vendor I'd simply forgotten. The retired bloodhound in me, however, was already on its feet, ears pricked, scenting the air. He was quiet, but he was awake. Then came the charity. The Children's Hope Alliance. A $5,000 transfer. My heart didn't sink, it just went cold, a hard, heavy stone in my chest. I was a financial auditor for 35 years. I know charities. I know their EINs, their registration paperwork, their financial disclosures. A 5-minute search from my phone, while I sat in my garden pretending to watch the robins, confirmed it. The Children's Hope Alliance did not exist. It was a ghost, a shell, a beautiful lie designed to plunder a kindly old man's account. And that's when I knew, with a certainty that felt like a physical blow, that this wasn't some random cyber thief. This was personal. This was someone who knew me, who knew my habits, who knew that Arthur Vance, the retired grandfather, would be the kind of man to support a children's charity. They were using my own perceived character against me. And then Mark's visits changed. They became a ritual of violation, disguised as filial duty. He'd show up with a 6-pack of the expensive imported beer he liked, the one I never drank, and a story. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to check your computer. There's a nasty virus going around," or "Your operating system is way out of date. Let me just run these updates for you." He'd sit in my office chair, his back to me, and his fingers would fly across the keyboard. I'd stand in the doorway, a mug of tea in my hand, playing my part to perfection. The forgetful old man, the technologically illiterate father. I'd ask him simple, stupid questions about the weather, about the baseball scores, anything to keep the mask firmly in place. All the while, I could feel it, the digital equivalent of him going through my wallet right in front of me. He was testing my security, probing my defenses, and, I was sure, planting the seeds for more withdrawals. He was seeing how much he could take before the clueless old man finally noticed his wallet was getting lighter. The worst of it, the part that truly festered, wasn't the theft. It was the soundtrack that accompanied it. It was the whispered conversations that drifted from my kitchen. Mark and Sarah, leaning against my countertops, using my coffee maker, living in my space while they plotted the dismantling of my life. The villa has to have a private pool. I'm not sharing with tourists. Can you imagine him here? He'd just be lost. We'll get the convertible, the red one. He probably still thinks a Cooper is something you eat. Their laughter was a soft, sharp weapon. It was a constant, quiet hum of disdain that filled the spaces of the house I had built, the home I had hoped would be a sanctuary for my family. They weren't just stealing my money, they were stealing my peace. They were turning my home into the staging ground for my own financial execution, and they were doing it with a casual cruelty that took my breath away. I would water my roses, the rich, red blooms I'd nurtured for years, and I would hear their voices through the open window, a chilling counterpoint to the gentle buzz of the bees. I was living in two realities at once, the serene, simple life of a retired man and the cold, calculating prelude to a betrayal so profound I could barely give it a name. The theft was the crime, but the whispers were the insult, and I was collecting every single one. The chime from my phone was soft, almost gentle, a single polite note that cut through the quiet of my study. It was the kind of sound you'd program for a text from a friend, not a 5-alarm fire, but that's exactly what it was. I looked down at the screen, and there it was, glowing in stark white text against a dark background. Security alert, login attempt, unrecognized device. For a moment, the world didn't tilt. It just clarified. The air in the room seemed to thin, every object snapping into a sharper, more defined focus. The worn leather of my chair, the grain of the oak desk, the faint dust-moted beam of afternoon sun cutting across the floor. This was it. The little tests, the small withdrawals, the condescending whispers I'd overheard. They had all been leading here. This was the main event. I'd reinstalled my old security suite weeks ago. It wasn't the bloatware that comes pre-packaged on a new computer. This was a custom-built piece of code, a ghost from my past life, a colleague from the old days, a man who now lived off the grid in Montana, still maintained it for me as a personal favor. I'd told him I'd had a phishing scare, which was true, but the deeper truth was a feeling, a prickle on the back of my neck I couldn't ignore. I'd told no one in my family. To them, my computer was just the machine where I played solitaire and read the news. My fingers, which sometimes fumbled with a TV remote, now moved over the laptop's keyboard with a speed and certainty that felt like muscle memory. The login screen vanished and I was in the suite's dashboard. It was a sparse, utilitarian interface, all cold data and stark logs. There was the attempt, time-stamped 3 minutes ago. The IP address was a mess, routed through a series of proxy servers in an attempt to obfuscate its origin. It was a clumsy attempt, the digital equivalent of wearing a bad disguise, a fake mustache and sunglasses indoors. An amateur's work, my son's work. And that's when the second piece clicked into place. The sound wasn't in the room, it was in my mind. A solid, heavy, metallic thunk of a lock sliding home. The camera. I had never told Mark I'd fixed the living room camera. Months ago, he'd accidentally knocked the small decorative owl off the bookshelf, severing its internal wiring. "Sorry, Dad, it's toast," he'd said, holding the two pieces apart. I just nodded, playing the part of the disappointed but understanding old man. But the following week, I'd spent an afternoon with a soldering iron and a new, higher resolution lens. I'd even upgraded the microphone. I told myself it was for security, for peace of mind. Now I knew it was for this moment. My hand was perfectly steady as I navigated to the camera's encrypted feed. It loaded instantly. And there he was, my son, Mark, sprawled on my couch, the one I'd read him stories on when he was a boy. His laptop was open on his knees. The expression on his face was one I hadn't seen since he was a teenager and thought he'd gotten away with something. It was a look of pure, unadulterated triumph, a smug, self-satisfied smirk that twisted his features into a mask of someone I didn't recognize. He wasn't just stealing from me, he was enjoying it. He was reveling in what he believed was his own superior intellect, outsmarting the doddering old fool in the next room. I zoomed in on his screen. The bank's transfer confirmation screen was clearly visible. The amount took my breath away, not because of the number itself, but because of its symbolism. $50,000. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a probe. This was the final brazen move, the big score, the one that would fund his and Sarah's escape to some tropical paradise, paid for with the life I had built. I watched his finger hover over the trackpad, over the confirm transfer button. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just watched, my breathing slow and deep. I saw the slight, decisive tap of his finger. I saw the screen change, the green transaction successful message appearing. I saw his smirk widen into a full, gloating smile. And in that precise crystalline moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a surge of anger, though anger was there, a cold, hard stone in my gut. It wasn't a wave of heartbreak, though I felt the fracture of a bond I thought was unbreakable. This was something else, something older. something I had put to sleep years ago, hoping it would never wake. It was the hunter, the tracker, the part of me that could look at a labyrinth of numbers and see the single greedy thread running through it all. The part of me that understood patterns, deception, and the fundamental predictable flaws in human character. The emotion drained from my face, replaced by a flat analytical calm. The hurt father receded, folding himself away into a quiet corner of my mind. The man who remained, the man staring at the screen, was someone Mark had never truly met. The switch flipped. The Bloodhound was awake. The blue light from the monitor was the only thing illuminating the room, casting long, cold shadows that seemed to swallow the familiar shapes of my bookshelves and my old leather armchair. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting on the keyboard, but I wasn't typing. I was listening. Not to any sound in the house, the silence was absolute, but to the quiet hum of my own mind shifting gears. The raw, gut-wrenching pain of the betrayal was still there, a hot, heavy stone in my chest, but it was being walled off, compartmentalized by a force I hadn't summoned in over a decade. The feeling was so familiar, it was like slipping on a well-worn coat. The cold, focused calm, the world narrowed to the data on the screen, and the hurt father I had been just minutes ago was receding, replaced by someone else. The hunter, the Bloodhound. For 35 years, this was my natural state. Corporations didn't hire me for my charm, they hired me for my nose. I could walk into a room filled with the scent of 1,000 legitimate transactions and isolate the single putrid note of fraud. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. Greed has a pattern. It's impatient, it's arrogant. It always leaves a trail, because the person committing the crime is so convinced of their own cleverness, they never stop to consider someone might be cleverer. And my son, my own flesh and blood, was proving to be a textbook case. He had gotten sloppy, not in a careless way, but in an entitled one. He thought his prey was blind. He saw a kindly old man who talked too much about his roses and not enough about his portfolio. He saw a father who trusted him implicitly. That was his fundamental and fatal miscalculation. He forgot that before I was a grandfather, I was the man who could trace a single dollar through a dozen shell companies in the Cayman Islands before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. My fingers began to move, the clicks of the mouse and the soft tap of the keys, the only sounds in the tomb-like quiet of my office. I started tracing, not with anger, but with a detached, clinical precision, the fake utility company, Apex Municipal Services. A clumsy name. I pulled its registration, filed just 6 weeks ago. The address was a virtual office, a mail drop service, amateur, the Phantom Charity, the Children's Future Fund. Even more laughable, its website was a template, its board of directors, a list of names I quickly cross-referenced to find they were lifted from a decade-old corporate annual report. He hadn't even bothered to create original aliases. Then I found it. The new entity, Horizon Holdings Limited, registered in a jurisdiction known for its opacity. But he'd been in a hurry. The paperwork was rushed. The digital fingerprints were all over it. An email address used to register the corporate agent was a minor variation on an old personal email of his, I remembered. A payment for the filing fees came from an account I recognized. He was using the very money he'd already siphoned from me to finance the larger theft. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. I wasn't just looking at transactions anymore. I was looking into his mind. I could see him sitting right here at this desk weeks ago, thinking he was so smart, building his little house of cards. He was following the basic playbook of embezzlement, but he was skipping the steps that required patience and paranoia. He wasn't covering his tracks because he didn't believe there was anyone back there tracking him. His weakness wasn't a lack of intelligence. It was an overabundance of contempt. And that's when the plan began to form. It didn't feel like a plan for revenge. Revenge is hot and messy and emotional. This was something colder, cleaner. This was reclamation. I would not confront him. I would not scream or plead or try to shame him. What would be the point? The man on that video feed, the one with the ugly laugh, he wasn't the boy I raised. Confrontation would only give him a stage, a chance to lie and manipulate. Number. I would do what I did best. I would follow the trail he had so carelessly laid, and I would use it to build a cage around him, a perfect, inescapable trap constructed from the very materials of his own crime, the money, the accounts, the digital footprints. I would turn his greed against him. I would make the stolen funds themselves the instrument of his undoing. The hunter was awake, and the prey had just finished painting a bright, glowing path right to its own doorstep. The only thing left to do was follow it and close the door behind me. The switch had flipped. The hurt father was gone, packed away in some deep, quiet corner of my mind. In his place sat the professional, the Bloodhound, and the hunt was now a silent digital siege that would play out over the next 48 hours. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic phone call, just the cold, meticulous work of reclamation. Step 1 was access. Mark thought he was clever, using an offshore bank in the Caymans, a place that whispered of secrecy and impunity to amateurs. To me, it whispered of lazy shortcuts and predictable patterns. I hadn't spoken to some of my old contacts in over a decade, but the network of trust built over 35 years doesn't just evaporate. A single encrypted call to a man in Zurich, a man who owed me a favor from a situation in Singapore I'd rather forget, and I had what I needed. Not the customer login, the administrative backdoor, the master key. I was no longer a user of the bank's system. For all intents and purposes, I was the system. I watched his account, a little digital vault he thought was his fortress, and I saw it for what it was, a house of cards. Step 2 was the rerouting. Freezing the account would have been an act of war, a declaration. It would have told him I was onto him, and a cornered rat is a dangerous one. No, I had a more elegant, more final solution. I would use his own greed as the weapon. I spent the next several hours not stealing the money back, but programming its journey home. I wrote a series of automated transactions, a beautiful, complex digital ballet. The code was a work of art. It didn't just pull the $212,000 he had siphoned from my life's work. It also clawed back the initial $50,000 of his own seed money he'd used to establish the fraudulent entities. He would be left with nothing, not a single cent of his ill-gotten gains, and not even the capital he'd risked to get them. Every dollar was then funneled through 3 separate, newly created and utterly untraceable trusts into a single, high-yield savings account. The beneficiary? My 7-year-old granddaughter Lily, her future secured with the money her father tried to steal from her grandfather. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. Step 3 was the misdirection. He had to believe this was his own fault. Arrogant people never blame themselves for their failures. They blame faulty tools, bad luck, or other people's incompetence. I would give him that excuse. I planted a single beautiful digital breadcrumb, a fake error log, buried deep in the bank's transaction history that made it appear as if a sloppy piece of code he had written, a script to automate the smaller transfers from my accounts, had misfired. According to my fabricated log, his script contained a fatal loop error that upon its final execution triggered a latent, high-level security protocol. A protocol that, in the log's dry technical language, initiated a full asset reclamation and account purging sequence due to fraudulent activity flags. In essence, I made it look like his own amateur hacking attempt had tripped a wire he never knew was there, and the bank system had eaten his money to protect itself. He would read that log and curse his own stupidity, his own lack of skill. He would never once look over his shoulder at the clueless old man. Step 4 was the evidence. While I meticulously erased my own digital footprints using proxies and encryption methods that would make a 3-letter agency blush, I left one thing completely pristine and untouched: the full, unedited login and transfer history. Every time he had accessed that account from his laptop, from his IP address, every transfer he had initiated with timestamps that matched exactly when my own security alerts had gone off. His digital fingerprints were all over the crime scene, smudged and clear for anyone with the authority to look. I wasn't going to the police, not yet, but I needed him to know that I could. I needed him to sit across from me at that dinner table and see in that unalterable data the sheer, inescapable depth of his exposure. For 48 hours I lived on coffee and the cold fire of focus. My garden went untended. The world outside my office window ceased to exist. I was a ghost in the machine, a phantom rewriting the reality my son thought he had built. And when the final line of code executed, when the last cent of Lily's future was secured and the digital trap was set, I leaned back in my old leather chair. The siege was over. The cage was built. And now all that was left was to watch him walk into it. The dining room table was set with my late wife's good china, the crystal glasses catching the warm, low light of the chandelier. It felt like a stage, and I was the director, the stage manager, the sole audience member for the final act. Mark and Sarah arrived exactly on time, their faces flushed with a poorly concealed, avaricious excitement. They thought they were coming to celebrate my good fortune, a small windfall I'd mentioned. They had no idea they were the ones who had provided it. Sarah gushed over the roast, a recipe my wife had perfected over 40 years. Mark clapped me on the back, his voice a little too loud, a little too hearty. "Looks great, Dad." So, this windfall, a lucky investment. He winked at Sarah, a private conspiratorial gesture that made my stomach turn. I just smiled, the gentle, slightly vague smile of the clueless old man he believed me to be. "Something like that," I said, my voice even. "We'll talk after dessert. Peach cobbler, your mother's favorite." I watched them through the entire meal, not as a father, but as the Bloodhound. I noted the way Mark's eyes darted around the room, mentally cataloguing the valuables he probably thought would be his soon. I saw Sarah's fingers, adorned with the diamond ring my money had bought, nervously tapping the table. They were feasting on a future built on my ruin. They were eating my food in my home with my stolen money, funding their dreams. The anger was there, a hot coal in my chest, but I banked it. Fury is a messy, inefficient tool. Cold, calculated action is a scalpel. When the last crumbs of cobbler were gone and the coffee was poured, I leaned back. "Now is," I said, my tone still deceptively light, "about that windfall." I picked up the small remote for the television. "I got a strange alert from the bank today. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Maybe you can help me, Mark. You're so good with these things." I pressed a button. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, mirroring my laptop. For a moment it was just my desktop background, a photo of me and my wife from happier times. Then, with a click of my mouse, a spreadsheet filled the screen. It was the transaction history. Every single transfer was highlighted, traced with arrows and notes in a stark clinical font. The fake utility payment, the phantom charity, the series of escalating transfers culminating in the $50,000 attempt to the offshore account. The destination account numbers, the dates, the amounts, it was all there, a damning digital ledger of his betrayal. The color drained from Mark's face so completely, it was as if someone had opened a valve in his neck. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. His fork clattered onto his plate, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "That's he stammered, his voice cracking. He swallowed hard. "That's a mistake, Dad. A glitch in the system. You know how these online banks are." I didn't answer him. I simply moved my cursor to a separate audio file on the desktop, labeled innocuously as Garden Notes. I clicked play. His voice, clear as day, filled the room, that same mix of condescension and ugly glee I had heard weeks ago. "He'll never know. The old man is clueless. He thinks I'm here to help him with his finances, to protect him in his old age." A cruel laugh. By the time he realizes half his retirement fund is gone and rerouted to our offshore account, we'll be in Bali. Sarah's giggle followed, a sound that now seemed monstrous. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any I had ever known. It was a physical weight pressing down on the room. Sarah had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with sheer terror. Mark was just staring at the screen, then at me, his mind visibly scrambling, trying to find a foothold in a reality that had just collapsed beneath him. I slowly stood up. I didn't need to, but I wanted to look down at him. I wanted him to feel the shift in the room's gravity. I let my posture change, the slight stoop I sometimes affected, straightening out. The gentle, forgiving light in my eyes extinguished, replaced by a flat, analytical coldness. I was no longer Arthur Vance, the forgetful grandfather. I was the man who had stared down Fortune 500 CEOs and made them crumble. I looked directly at my son, and for the first time I let him see the predator he had awakened. My gaze was devoid of any fatherly love, any hurt, any plea for an explanation. It was the gaze of a professional assessing a completed audit. "The camera was fixed, Mark," I said, my voice low, each word precise and deliberate, like a hammer driving a nail. "And so was the man you thought was broken." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His bravado had evaporated, leaving behind the petulant, greedy child he truly was. "I was a bloodhound, son," I continued, the old nickname feeling foreign yet perfectly fitting on my tongue. I gestured toward the damning evidence still displayed on the massive screen. "You just left a trail of steak." The silence that fell after his voice echoed through the room was the most absolute sound I have ever heard. It wasn't an absence of noise, it was a physical presence, thick and heavy, swallowing the space between us. Sarah didn't look at me, didn't look at Mark. Her face, which moments before had been a mask of greedy anticipation, was now a sheet of pure, undiluted panic. She made a small, choked sound in her throat, scrambled backward from the table and fled the room. I heard the front door open and slam shut, the sound a period at the end of a sentence I never thought I'd have to write. Mark didn't move to stop her. He seemed to deflate, his body folding in on itself as if the bones had been removed. He collapsed into the armchair my wife had loved, the one she'd read in every evening, and the sobs that racked him were ugly, raw things. They weren't the tears of remorse. I knew the difference. These were the tears of a gambler who has just lost his entire stake, of a man whose perfect, clever plan has just been publicly dismantled. Dad, I can explain," he choked out between gasps. "It was Sarah. She pressured me. She said we needed the money, that you had so much and you wouldn't even notice. It was just going to be a loan, I swear. We were going to pay it all back with interest before you ever knew. I was weak. I was so stupid." The excuses poured out of him in a torrent, a desperate, flimsy narrative he was constructing on the spot. He blamed her ambition, the pressure of providing a certain lifestyle, the temptation that was just too great. He even at one point tried to blame me, my comfortable retirement, my perceived lack of need for the funds, my old-fashioned way of living that he claimed made him feel inadequate. Each word was another layer of insulation he was trying to build between himself and the cold, hard truth of his own character. I listened. I stood there, my hands resting lightly on the back of my dining chair, and I absorbed every pathetic syllable. And I felt nothing, not the white-hot rage a father should feel, not the heart-shattering grief. There was only a hollow, vast coldness inside my chest, as if my very core had been scooped out and replaced with Arctic air. The part of me that was his father, the man who had bandaged his skinned knees and cheered at his little league games, had been methodically dismantled over the preceding weeks. What was left was the Bloodhound. And a bloodhound does not feel anger at the fox. It simply follows the trail to its conclusion. Momentushin. When his torrent of words finally slowed to a choked whimper, I spoke. My voice was calm, flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice I used to use when presenting a board of directors with evidence of their CFO's multi-million-dollar embezzlement. It was a voice that stated facts, not feelings. The money is gone from your accounts, I said. Every single cent you stole, plus the seed capital you used to establish the shell entities. It has been transferred into an irrevocable trust for your daughter, my granddaughter. It will be there for her education, her future, safeguarded from you. He stared at me, his eyes wide and swimming with a fresh wave of shock. He had been prepared for my anger, for my hurt. He could have manipulated those. He was not prepared for this cold, surgical precision. I have compiled a complete dossier, I continued. Digital forensics tracing the entire scheme, from the first test transaction to your final login attempt 48 hours ago. I have the audio and video recordings from this room. It is all ready to be sent to the district attorney's office with a single click. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching the color drain completely from his face. I am not going to send it, I said, and I saw a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. Not yet. You have 1 hour. 1 hour to gather your things and leave my house. If you are not gone in 60 minutes, the evidence goes to the authorities, and I will not lift a finger to help you. You will face a trial for grand larceny and financial fraud. You will go to prison. The hope in his eyes died. This was a worse punishment. I was denying him the drama of a courtroom, the potential for a legal loophole, the chaos in which he might have tried to wriggle free. I was giving him the quiet, humiliating exile of a thief caught by his own victim. The public shame, for this story would inevitably leak to the rest of the family, to his friends, and the total, absolute financial loss were a cage I had built just for him. It was a more fitting punishment than any cell. He didn't argue. The fight had gone out of him. He was broken, exposed not just as a criminal, but as a fool who had tried to outsmart a master. He pushed himself up from the chair, his movements slow and heavy, like an old man. He didn't look at me as he shuffled out of the living room and up the stairs to the room that had been his as a boy. I stood in the same spot, listening to the sounds of him packing a bag overhead. The house was filled with a new kind of quiet. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of retirement I had cultivated for years. This was a profound and permanent silence, the quiet that comes after a fundamental truth has been revealed and a relationship has been irrevocably severed. It was the sound of an ending. The seasons have turned. The sharp, cold anger of that night has mellowed into something quieter, something more like the deep, settled earth in my garden after a long winter. Months have passed, the world kept spinning, and so did I. I took a portion of the money he'd tried to steal, the money I'd taken back, and I did something with it that felt clean. I didn't want it tainting my own accounts, a constant reminder, so I established a small scholarship at the local community college for students studying forensic accounting. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a name building or a massive endowment. It was a quiet fund, a helping hand for a kid with a sharp, analytical mind who might not otherwise get a shot. I called it the Bloodhound grant, a private joke with myself. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was funding the education of future hunters with the spoils of my own hunt. The college administrator, a pleasant woman named Brenda, asked if I wanted to meet the first recipient. I declined. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about balance, about turning something poisoned into something pure. My relationship with my son is over. There's no other way to say it. The cord was cut that night at the dinner table, not with a scream, but with a cold, precise click of a mouse playing back his own voice. The silence that followed his departure was the most profound sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter closing forever. I hear things, of course. The family grapevine is a slow, meandering river of half whispers and reluctant updates. He and Sarah didn't last 6 weeks after they left my house. The pressure of their shared failure, the collapse of their barley fantasy, it shattered whatever fragile bond their greed had built. He's working some dead-end job now, data entry or something of the sort, living on a friend's couch. There is a part of me, the father part that I thought was gone, that feels a pang of something when I hear that. It's not pity. It's not sorrow. It's more like the distant recognition of a mathematical certainty. He built his house on sand, and the tide came in. There is no reconciliation. I don't want one. He isn't sorry for what he did. He's only sorry he got caught. To invite that back into my life would be a form of self-betrayal I am no longer capable of. And in the absence of that noise, there is a profound peace, the peace of a problem solved, a variable in the equation of my life that has been definitively resolved. There's no more wondering, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped. I caught it, and I threw it away. I am still a grandfather. That title, at least, remains untarnished. My granddaughter, Lily, she visits me directly now. She's 8 years old, all scraped knees and endless questions. She comes on Saturday afternoons, her mother dropping her off at the end of the driveway. We don't talk about her father. We have an unspoken agreement, she and I, that this garden, this house, is a separate world. Our world. We work out here for hours. I show her how to tell the difference between a weed and a seedling, how to gently loosen the soil around the tomato plants without damaging the roots. She gets her hands dirty, her focus absolute. Sometimes I watch her, this small, serious person, and I see a mind that observes, that calculates, that understands cause and effect. She doesn't take things at face value. She'll point to a plant and ask, "But what's happening under the dirt, Grandpa? How does it really work?" I am still Arthur Vance. The man who was the Bloodhound for 35 years is still here, present in the way I read the newspaper, in the way I manage what's left of my life. But the clueless old man, the persona I wore for my family, the kindly, forgetful grandfather, that man is a ghost. He was a fiction, a comfortable lie I told for the sake of a peace that turned out to be false. He's been exorcised. I don't miss him. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evening, the scent of turned earth and blooming jasmine around me, I am just a man who knows the weight of silence, the value of a well-tended garden, and the precise, unyielding cost of protecting what is his. The sun is warm on my face. The problem is solved. And for now, that is enough. There's a quiet that settles in after the storm has passed. It's not the same quiet as before. Before it was the quiet of peace, of contentment, of a life earned and being gently lived out. Now it's the quiet of resolution. The dust has settled, the pieces have been picked up, and what's left is the truth, stark and unadorned. People have asked me in the months since it all happened if I'm angry, if I'm bitter. They see a man in his garden tending to his tomatoes, and they assume the storm inside must still be raging. But it's not. I've been thinking a lot about lions. You see them in documentaries. These magnificent old males, their manes thick and scarred, lying in the sun. They look passive, almost lazy. You might be tempted to think their time is past, that the fire in their belly has gone out. But a lion doesn't forget how to hunt just because it's grown old and rests in the sun. The knowledge is in its bones, in its muscle memory, in the ancient instinct that resides behind its calm, watchful eyes. It simply chooses its battles. It conserves its energy for the fight that matters, the one that threatens its pride, its territory, its very existence. It knows that not every rustle in the grass requires a charge, but when the true threat emerges, the transformation is instantaneous and absolute. The calm vanishes, and what is revealed is the pure, unadulterated essence of a predator. That is the mistake my son made. He saw the man resting in the sun. He saw the peace I had cultivated in my retirement and mistook it for weakness. He heard my silence on matters of money and mistook it for ignorance. He looked at a lifetime of gentle patience and assumed it was a lifetime of dullness, of being out of touch. He never considered that my silence wasn't a void, but a deep, still lake, and beneath its placid surface moved currents of immense strength and clarity. He thought he was the hunter, and I was the prey. He never understood that the most dangerous predator is the one you never see coming, the one you have completely written off, the one you believe, in your arrogance, is no longer a factor in the game. This wasn't about being clever. It wasn't about being a better technician with a computer, though my old skills served me well. This was about understanding the fundamental nature of the conflict. He was driven by greed, a frantic, desperate energy that made him sloppy. I was driven by principle, by a cold, clear need to protect what was mine and to administer a lesson that was long overdue. His was a hot fire, quickly burning out of control. Mine was a forge, heating slowly until it could temper steel. And that is the lesson I want to leave you with. It is never ever too late to reclaim your power. Your power isn't just your money or your possessions. It's your dignity. It's your right to live in peace without being victimized by those who should protect you. It's the authority you have over your own life. You can lay that power down for a time. You can set it aside to build a family, to enjoy a quiet life, to be kind. But you must never forget where you put it. You must never forget that it is yours, and yours alone to wield. Someone watching this might be in a similar situation. Maybe it's not a son. Maybe it's a business partner, a so-called friend, a colleague who thinks you've passed your prime. They see your kindness as a loophole. They see your peace as an invitation. I am here to tell you, do not be afraid to reach back into your past and find the person you used to be. That person isn't gone, they are just resting. Integrate their strength with the wisdom you have now. That combination, the fire of youth tempered by the steel of experience, is an unstoppable force. So remember the old lion. Remember that the sun on its fur is not a sign of surrender, but of choice. And remember that your silence is your own. It can be a gift of peace, or it can be the quiet before you reclaim everything that is rightfully yours. The choice is always yours. And if you found a lesson in this story, share it. Talk about it. Someone else out there might be feeling cornered, feeling like the clueless old man or woman, and they need to hear this. They need to know that it is never too late to stand up, to remember who you are, and to protect what's yours. Your power is waiting for you to pick it back up. All you have to do is reach for it.